Hey folks, welcome back to Only the Best Fantasy Novels. My name is Robin, and this is the first of a two-part video series. This video is my best fantasy books of 2024. This is pretty much only going to cover new releases and sequels and that kind of thing. I do have a second part that I'll be putting out whenever I get around to filming it, which is my best fantasy series of 2024, and that's going to cover all the completed series or the ongoing series or the series that I started in general. Anyway, my 15 picks for this list. At number 15, I have Shannon Lee and Fonda Lee's Breath of the Dragon, which is actually a 2025 release, but I got an arc for it. And it's this incredible story based on the life and teachings of Bruce Lee, where we follow a young man who enters a martial arts tournament dreaming of glory. But he quickly finds out that the situation is far from anything that he perceived going into it. And what we get instead is this really incredible story, a very action-packed story, a very thrilling story nonetheless, but this really incredible story of just family, duty, honor, and we really get to examine some things that are very, some themes that are very essential to, I would say, the Chinese diaspora, in terms, like, really delving into isolationism and the cost that these things have on families and so. It's an incredibly well done. It's an incredibly well done book. It's the first of a duology, and I can easily see it being among, as the year progresses, I can easily see it being listed among the best releases of 2025. Moving on, at number 14, I have The Belly of the Bull by K.J. Parker, and this is the second book of his Fencer trilogy. And in this one, we shift to an all new part of the world that was only tangentially mentioned in the first one. We see new factions enter the fray and this kind of thing. Our main character, Bardas Leorden, is living a very different life from what we first saw him in the first book. But the reason why this book makes a list is because it has the most deranged, unhinged ending of anything I can recall reading in the last decade. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. I was not even remotely prepared for the way this book ends. So yeah, enough about that. Moving on, at number 13, I have The Seven Moons of Mali Almeida by Shehan Karnatikala. And this is a literary fantasy novel that I think it actually won the Booker Prize a year. But it really takes a strong, hard look at the Sri Lankan civil wars, and when I think of the closest thing I could think of to this book is probably Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse 5, in the way that Shehan Karnatikala examines the story. Like, it's done from a very humorous, absurdist perspective, where it's not the forces, the fear and everything is dialed up to such a level that it's almost caricaturish in how it's dealt with. But the essential story that we follow is that of a war photographer who's been murdered, and the story opens with him essentially awakening as a newly dead individual, and he has 7 moons in which to lead the people he loves to a series of photographs he took that has intense political ramifications for the conflict. So, like, this is a really great book, start to finish. It's not a conflict I'm familiar with in any way, shape, or form, but Shehan Karnatikala did a brilliant job with this book. But yeah, anyway, moving on, at number 12, another literary fantasy novel I have is Catherine Arden's The Warm Hands of Ghosts, and this one takes us to World War One, where we follow the story of a nurse who's just returned from a tour of duty, and she receives word that her brother was killed in action, but she quickly has reason to dispute that official record, and she decides to go out on another tour of duty to see if she can discover what happened to her brother. And as we follow her and some other characters along on their journey, we get a really good look at the cost that the war had on family, on society, and these kind of things. It's a really incredible book, just a really engaging one from start to finish. And for me, it solidified Catherine Arden as an author that I'm going to read anything she writes. But anyway, moving on, at number 11, I have The Book That Broke the World by Mark Lawrence. This is the second book in his library trilogy, and in this one, everything just got dialed up a notch. Like, the stakes got escalated, the conflict got escalated. We got another major POV. The story that we were following so far took a pretty interesting twist. Like, this is Mark Lawrence's I would say it's his most creative trilogy to date. I've been a fan of his since the Broken Empire trilogy. And for me, I consider this his most creative trilogy to date. Not just in terms of the story and the world building and that kind of thing, but just the almost like the themes and the topics that he touches on in this book. Like, this book really got me thinking on the way that information impacts society and these kind of things. It's just really well done, and I'm super hyped for the final book that comes out this year, in 2025, to find out how this all wraps up. Anyway, to keep things moving on, we have at number 10, The Saint of Bright Doors by Vajra Chandrasekhar. And this is just a really crazy story of a child who was raised to be an assassin. An assassin to his... He was raised to be an assassin, but he escapes and goes to the big city. And things quickly take a twist when the person he's supposed to assassinate comes to town. But yeah, and this was a really strange madcap kind of story. Vajra Chandrasekhar is probably the closest writer I've come across to, in terms of style and the things that he delves into. The closest writer I can think of is China Miéville. So that's to give you an idea of just the level of weird and strange and creativity and the uniqueness of this book. Like, this book was just so fascinating to read from start to finish. And I did read the book that's tangentially connected to this one, Rakeswall, and he dialed things up even more a notch here. So if you're interested in, like, let's call it weird fiction, this book is one you definitely want to check out. To keep things moving along, at number 9, we have Goddess of the River by Vaishnavi Patel. And this is a pick that... this is essentially one of those whole feminist retelling ones, except in this one, the character that she decides to retell is a Hindu deity, the Mother Ganga, and it's essentially a retelling of a portion of the Mahabharata, and this was really well handled. Like, I'm not too big into the whole feminist retelling thing, or just those mythological retellings in general, but this one was really well done, just because Vaishnavi Patel is just such a good writer. Like, she did a great job of making this character that we follow very much human yet inhuman in the way that she approaches so many things. We had just this amazing character arc as she goes through her story, and we also got a pretty great look at the events of the Mahabharata from a different lens, where things are not necessarily as black and white as they may seem. It's just a really good book. Like, there's no single character in here, and this is a book that has gods and all sorts of stuff in there. There's no single character in here that you can say is definitively good or definitively evil. They're all complex beings to read about. And it was just fascinating to read about. Anyway, at number 8, we have a pretty fun book that came out this year, and that is The Silver Blood Promise by James Logan. And I tend to think of this book as like Scott Lynch light, because that's kind of the vibe you get from it. Excuse me. But it's got that same kind of light-hearted, adventurous feel. Like, our main character is basically the typical aristocratic wastrel. He gets ejected from society when he unwittingly murders someone, and then so he's been essentially a rolling stone for quite a few years when he gets called back home and his father gets murdered. And his father gets murdered under very mysterious circumstances, leaving behind a tantalizing clue. And he decides to set out to see what to follow the threads of this clue, and it just takes him on this pretty interesting adventure. Um, like this is an entertaining book. I think that's the main thing that it has going for it. Like the dynamic between the main character and the side character is one of the best things I've read this year. Like it was really well done. I could easily read quite a few more books of those two, especially because the side character is not someone you would typically follow in these kind of stories. But it was really well done, and I'm pretty excited to see where things go in the next book this year, the Black Fire Blade. But to keep things moving on, at number 7 we have one of the funniest books I've read this year, and that is Crucible of Chaos by Sebastian de Castell. And this is very much a standalone. I think it was done for marketing reasons to include this in his new series, but this is very much a standalone set in the world of his greatcoats. And in this one, we follow the King's Crucible, who is just this flamboyant, hilarious, really amusing character to follow. This particular greatcoat is the one that investigates the more supernatural aspects of events, and he answers a call to go and arbitrate a dispute at a monastery where he has almost like a passive aggressive relationship with the abbot. And when he walks in, he finds the situation far beyond anything he can expect. It was pretty much open civil war in this monastery, and he has to delve into the mystery of it all while some pretty freaky stuff starts happening. But yeah, like the main character is the backbone of this book. He was such a joy to read. And from start to finish, like this book was just entertainment dialed up to 11. Easily one of the best books I've read this year, and that's why it's on this list. One of the best books I read in 2024. I mean, anyway, we're starting to get to the end here. At number 6, I have Adrian Tchaikovsky's Guns of the Dawn, which is just a really brilliant standalone that combines military flintlock fantasy with like this, I think it's Edwardian, this pseudo-Edwardian period, and we essentially follow this conflict where it's been dragged out so long that all the men of fighting age have already gone to war and been killed. All the young ones have already been called up and killed. All the old ones have already been called up and killed, and they're at the point now where they're starting to call out the women of fighting age. And we follow Emily Marshwick, who answers that call to go to the front lines, and she becomes embroiled in this war. And quickly it becomes clear that nothing they were sold about this war is actually what's going on. And this is just a really entertaining, brilliant story from start to finish. Like Tchaikovsky just has that magic with his books that when he nails it, he just nails it really well. This is one that it's definitely up there for me with him. Really incredible book. If you're ever looking for a really good fantasy standalone, this is one to check out. And anyway, at number 5, we have the opening to what's probably going to be one of my favorite series before very long, if the other books are anything like this first one, and that is The Will of the Many by James Islington. And this is a story of a pseudo Roman society where we follow a young man who has this mysterious past that gets into that quite a lot, so you can figure out what's going on. But he essentially makes a bargain with a high-powered senator to enter a magic school, their version of a magic school anyway, to investigate the death of his brother for him. In exchange, the main character gets the benefit of going to this school, which is essentially just a prep school for the next generation of highly influential, high-powered people, officials within this empire. And this is just a brilliant book from start to finish. Like the school follows the whole dark academia trend, whatever. And the school storyline does very much wrap up in this first book, by the way. But James Islington has quickly proven to be an author who can take classic fantasy tropes and just do breathtaking things with them. And this is one such book. Like our main character, I'm convinced is a sociopath of some level with some of the decisions that he makes in here, which just made for really compelling reading. The school is structured in such a way that it's just a constant, it's just a whole crab of barrels scenario, because your ranking within the school determines your political ranking when you leave the school and enter the real world. So, and it does have a lot, and in addition to that, in addition to the personal rankings, like everyone is essentially among the privileged elite. They're all like the children of highly placed senators and these kind of things. So they have all these various family factions and interests that do play a part within the interactions within the school. So it's just really incredibly done. In addition to that, we get a lot of teases of a much stranger, much larger conflict that's slowly brewing in the background, especially with the way this book ends. So this is easily one of the best books of 2024, and I'm hyped for the next one that can't come out soon enough for me. Anyway, at number 4, we have a book that hit me clean out of left field. It's one of the few self-published books I've read, and it's also one of the best books I've read, and that is The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. And this book, oh my god, like, I just love this book. So we essentially follow a young man who is forced to question his worldview when someone from the big city moves to his rural town, and he's forced to question his worldview, but he doesn't get much time to do it when an invasion happens, and his clan is essentially at the forefront. Is essentially the military outpost that is meant to stave off invasion, or to at least buy time for a response to come from the city. Anyway, that's the general gist of it. This is just a really incredible story. Like, M.L. Wang took some big swings with this book, and for me, they paid off spectacularly. This is a book that's very distinctly split into 3 parts. We have the Bildungsroman at the start. We have just this massive epic battle in the middle, flush in the middle, which would typically be the ending of most epic fantasy stories. But then where this book gets really interesting is the third act, because it takes time to step back and within the same book examine the conflict and the fallout and the ramifications of that conflict on this family, on this society, and all of that. And like, this is just a really brilliant book from start to finish. It delves into so many different things. Like, I don't want to get into it because it has a lot of spoilers, that a lot of things that you can't really touch on without it being spoilers. But it's just a really great book. A really great book. If you're looking for really good standalone fantasy, The Sword of Kaigen is one to give a shot. Anyway, moving on, at number 3, I have The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. And this is just this incredibly potent story of 2 young men who they rescue a goddess and they shepherd her across the land to essentially fulfill a promise. But the story is the magic of this story is just is the way in which it's told. Like, I read this book. This was one of the first books I read in 2024, and at the end of 2024, it's still one of the most incredible things I've ever read. It just does so many things right. Like, it does for second and third person POVs. It switches between so many different characters. Like, you get so many tidbits that add a convolute to the story. You get just so many different themes and discussions, and so many things it dives into, and it's a really incredible. I always struggle to talk about this book because it just does so much so right. it's a lot to unpack. It's a lot to unpack. It's a lot to think about. And it's easily one of the most fascinating, one of the most compelling standalone fantasy novels I've ever read. It's one of those books I think I would have to read at least 2 or 3 times just to even begin to process everything that it does. But at the same time, like, it touches on so many different aspects of the genre. Like, this book has a little bit of everything for everyone. And Simon Jimenez, to pull this off, he's just a brilliant author. And you see it in the prose, in the way that things are described and so in this book. Like, it's one of those books you have to try for yourself. At number 2, we have everyone's year-end booktube darling, Brandon Sanderson's Wind and Truth. I love Brandon Sanderson, so despite the problems with this book, I had a blast with it. I have the unpopular opinion that I'm one of those rare people who actually doesn't give a damn about Seth, or doesn't care about him really in any way, shape, or form. So this being his book where we got his backstory, that aspect of it really didn't work for me. But so much else about this book I just enjoyed. Like, I think the star of it for me, for the majority of it, was actually Adeline, which is a character who I was like okay with throughout the series. But this was the book that really made me like enjoy reading about him. But yeah, and then of course here's the ending. Now this is by no means a perfect book, but for me, I had a blast with it. And anyway, my number 1 pick, the best book I've read in 2024, and one of the best fantasy books I've ever read, is Jared Pekachek's The West Passage. And this is a ridiculously imaginative, creative book inspired by Gorman Gass. It's one of the most utterly compelling, strange, horrific, and brilliant things I've read in recent memory. And we follow this main character who sets out to warn of the return of an ancient evil. But the society that has to face this returning evil is a shadow of its former self. It's just like, if you're a fan of Gorman Gass, just the ossification, the decrepitude, that kind of vibe that you got from the entire Gorman Gass situation, that's very much caught in this book. The difference is that this one is just brilliantly imaginative. Like, the author is also an artist, and this book is loaded with just really fascinating artwork. This is one of the few books where the cover art actually matches things that are in the book, and as you can tell from that cover art, it's pretty freaky. Some of the things that happened in here just shocked and awed me. It's just brilliantly done. One of the most, like I said, one of the most compelling, imaginative fantasy novels I've read in a very, very long time. And if you try no other book on this list, you need to try this book. And yeah, that's my pick for top 15 books of 2024. If you've read any of these, if you have any thoughts, feel free to drop a comment. And as I mentioned, this is the first of 2 videos. Whenever I get around to it, you'll see my best fantasy series of 2024. And that's all I have for you today. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.